Hey guys, it is Nat from Twiniversity, and I am very, very excited to give you some good news. So the first good news is that right now, instead of just doing a live feed here on Facebook, we are also dual streaming live on Instagram. We have never done this before, so I apologize if it took a bonus minute, but I was like, we're gonna try it today. So we have two different audiences that are from different parts of the world. Hi, everybody. Everybody is logging on. So I just want to welcome our Facebook peeps and our Instagram peeps and give you kind of a rundown of what's going to happen today. Today, we are talking about hybrid feeding. This might be kind of weird. I may just have to speak here, so my Instagram people, you may have to just understand. But today, we're going to talk about hybrid feeding, and it's something that Julie and I both kind of done, and I asked a question over on Instagram yesterday, which is why we're over live over there, because I found that so many people are doing it, but you guys don't really know that there's a name for it. So thanks to our friends at Dr. Brown's, which I hope I remembered everything. Thanks to our friends at Dr. Brown's, we're going to have a discussion today about hybrid feeding and give you guys some kind of tips and tricks on how to navigate feeding two babies at once. And the moral of the story is you're going to see that there's a lot of different ways to do it. And ultimately, our goal is to just have you be successful and happy. So first thing I want to start out with is say that how does everything look? How does everything sound? If it looks okay and sounds okay, happy faces, hearts, whatever, I just like to have some kind of interaction knowing that you are hearing me okay. Then for the next, 40 minutes or so, we're going to talk about what hybrid feeding is. And if you've participated in any of our live feeds before, you know that there may or may not be prizes involved, because we love some prizes. So our prizes are going to be hosted over on our Facebook page. So for my Instagram families that are back there watching me, jump over to Twiniversity's Facebook page if you would like to win some prizes. All right, guys. Perfect. Thank you, Megan, for letting me know, and Valentina and all the rest of the gang. So the first thing that I want to do, like always, I just want to say good morning, and I would love if you guys each said good morning to each other. So I want to know where you are from. So that's the first thing. And Twiniversity always stands on our three different pillars, and one is community, which is what we're going to do right now. We're going to connect with each other. Then the next one is education, which we're going to give you a few bits of info today. And then, of course, it's humor, because I don't know how to not be funny. And here's my funny story about the humor. When I was in college, like the first week of college, I took this test. And the test was supposed to evaluate kind of what industries you should go into. Now, if you've heard the story or not, I'm telling you anyway, because I think it's hysterical. So this test was supposed to tell me kind of like, hey, these are the skills that you have, these are your assets, these are what you need to work on. So I took this test, and it was like maybe 400 or so questions. And so all my friends in college were taking it at the time as well. And we're all taking in this like library room where all these computers were housed. So everybody's taking this test, and at the end of answering this, everybody is getting these sheets and sheets and paper. So I have no shame in my game. I am 41 years old. So this was, a few years ago, and there was still the dot matrix printers. You know how there was like the printers with the strips on the side with the little dots? Do you guys remember this? I feel like the oldest person in the world. Well, there was these dot matrix printers, and the dot matrix printers would start spewing out all of these different ideas for all of my friends that were in school with me, and who was recommended to be a pilot, and who was recommended to go into engineering. And people came up with so many different options, and then mine only came up with two options of what I would be as a career. Julie, I don't even know if you know this story. I don't even know if my own team knows this story. But what's so funny is that my only two options, literally, I'm not even kidding you, I can't even make this up. My first option was that I should look into becoming a sign language interpreter. That was my first option for a career. And the second career was a stand-up comedian. I can't even tell you how that rocked my little college mind was like, okay, everybody got all these great things and I've basically been painted into a corner of being a sign language interpreter. Well, clearly I didn't really do either, but we inject a lot of humor here at Twiniversity because life is funny. And when you have 2 babies, it's kind of crazy. And if you don't laugh, then yeah, you gotta laugh. There's really no other option. So we're going to talk today about a lot of stuff. Hopefully I'm going to make you laugh a few times. We're going to give away some prizes. Julie is in the background. So over on our Facebook page, Julie is in the background, and she is the wizard behind the curtain at Oz. She's the one that's going to be answering questions, shooting me questions if you have them. And I really do want you guys to send me any questions that you have, because this is our opportunity to be together, right? So like I said, today's chat is brought to us by our friends at Dr. Brown's. I don't know if you guys are using Dr. Brown's bottles. I use them exclusively with my own twinnies, and we talk a lot about them in Twiniversity class. I actually just made this bottle, and have you guys noticed that sometimes when you put bottles in the dishwasher, they turn colors a little bit? I do want to assure you that that is not a big deal whatsoever. Usually if you wash them with like tomato sauce, which this girl just did, it gets a little stained from that, but I promise you, I've even researched with Dr. Brown's and spoke to them that it does not affect the integrity of our bottle whatsoever. So now that we've got that out of the way, I'm curious to know if you guys are hybrid feeding. So Julie and I this morning, we were like, you know, what's the definition of hybrid feeding, and how are we going to tell people what exactly hybrid feeding is? Because I know that I did it. I know that a lot of our families on Instagram are doing it because we asked a question yesterday about that. But hybrid feeding, we came up with an actual definition. Are you ready? Hybrid feeding is a purposeful method of thoughtfully combining formula into a feeding schedule of a breastfed baby. This whole thing that I was reading, all the comments that you guys were posting yesterday, was so many of you gave up breastfeeding because you weren't either producing enough milk or you didn't have the time to commit to breastfeeding your twinnies. Well, that's what hybrid feeding is. Hybrid feeding is finding a balance between giving your babies breast milk, right, because breast is best. And we want you to teach you that there are things that are not dirty words. Like for my breastfed mamas, this is not a dirty thing to use. A lot of twin families combine pumping with bottle feeding, right? So we're bottle feeding breast milk. But not only are we going to bottle feed breast milk, but sometimes we really do. We got to breastfeed, we got to bottle feed formula. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. And through our research here at Twiniversity, we found that if parents of twins combine different methods of feeding, that you will actually breastfeed longer. Because everybody is so quick to throw in the towel because you're like, oh, I'm not producing enough milk, I can't do this, it's too overwhelming. It's not an all or nothing situation, guys. There are a lot of different ways that we could handle feeding our babies. And considering that we're feeding them 8 times a day, 24 hours a day, that's 16 feeds, it is overwhelming and a lot. And we know this. And Julie and I had a great discussion this morning about how we make great plans. And we also find that families that experience infertility and have to go through IVF are significantly more dedicated to breastfeeding their babies because they're just like, I invested so much time and so much energy into this that I really want to make sure that I'm doing what's best for your baby. Well, I'm not saying that breast milk clearly isn't best for your baby. I'm saying that it's one of those situations where you got to put your oxygen mask on first, and you really have to make a concentrated effort into doing what works for your family. And if breastfeeding exclusively to the tap, so to speak, isn't working, and I did bring Fred and Ginger along with me today, because the other thing that I want to talk about is pace feeding. And pace feeding is also something that comes up a lot at Twiniversity. Hi, how are you? We got Fred here too. Come on, Fred. Here's Fred. Of course, Fred and Ginger are joining us today because I want to use them. I'm going to rest Fred over on top of my cable box. So let's talk a little bit about hybrid feeding, and I want to know what you guys are doing. Is anybody doing this now? So I'm reading that Valentina, she's scared because she's due at the end of this month. We get it. Like, it's so much to have 20s as it is. So let's talk about perhaps creating some strategies and maybe even talk about creating some realistic expectations. What's I'm going to do with my bottle? When my own 20s were in the NICU, which I don't know if you guys know this, and, you know, I don't know. Also, Julie, could you link my birth story over on the birth hour? I would love if you did that. So I just gave my entire birth story over to Bryn, and it's on a podcast if you guys have any interest in hearing the whole story. But at the end of the story, you'll find out that my 20 spent not a long time in the NICU. We spent a month in the NICU, and I know in the grand scheme of things that a month isn't a long time. But because they were so little, and to be very, very honest with you, and I don't know if you guys notice, I'm usually very honest with you, my boobs were too big, and I would try to feed them, and I would become very, very overwhelmed. And having them to the breast, so to speak, just really overwhelmed me. They were so super tiny, and I was scared out of my mind. So in the NICU, they taught us all about hybrid feeding. It just wasn't a name. There was no name to what it is. So they would recommend that I would go and pump before the feed, and I would create, I would create some breast milk, and I would bring the babies my breast milk in a bottle, and that way it wouldn't be so overwhelming for me. That is one way to hybrid feed. So there's a lot of different ways, right? So we could bottle feed breast milk. We could bottle feed formula. We could have one baby at a breast, one baby using a bottle. We could never have them to our breast, and we could have them exclusively pump, right? So there's so many different ways that we could do this. And I know I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm so excited that we're having this discussion because it's not something that we do often at Twiniversity. So we don't often have discussions about hybrid feeding. We talk a lot about breastfeeding. We talk a lot about bottle feeding. But for our families that are watching now, and I'm seeing by all your comments that it's just so great that you guys are so far ahead of the game in knowing that there's so many options that you could experience. So the first question that we had is that one of our people were saying that Addie was saying that you had weight gain issues. Sometimes you'll go to the doctor, and if your babies aren't gaining appropriately, what could happen is the doctor could say, okay, you know what? We have to figure out an alternative to breastfeeding because you're not producing enough breast milk or whatever the case may be. The interesting fact is that when your babies are born, depending on the type of delivery that you had, your babies actually may be, not 100%, but they may have either the saline that's in your body or basically they're at an artificially higher weight. So when you have your babies for the first time and they start to lose weight, many parents panic. And some of them even are like, forget it, I'm not going to breastfeed, just bottle feed the babies and call it a day. That happens. If that's happened to you, I would love to know if that's something that you guys have experienced. But a lot of people get very, very anxious and they immediately resort to bottle feeding formula. Don't do that. Try to do both. The reason why I want you to try is because you can't decide later that you want to breastfeed. You could only decide in the very beginning that you want to breastfeed. And I know that we're getting some comments that it's too time consuming. Yeah, it's time consuming, but so is washing bottles, making bottles 100% of the time. If you could do a little bit of both, it's not the worst idea that you could ever have. But some families immediately resort to giving their babies bottles in the hospital, but I don't think you should. I think you should attempt to breastfeed and see how it goes and then figure out how much you're making. Maybe we're making enough milk from one baby. We probably will make enough milk from one baby. And even if you don't, I'm going to rest this here, which is kind of odd that I have like this bottle in the shot. Maybe you'll make enough milk from one baby. And if you do, awesome. But if you don't, that doesn't mean you shouldn't breastfeed. That's the moral of the story. And you would have to make some bottles as well. But if you're going to do a combination of breastfeeding and bottle feeding, there is a technique that lactation consultants really do recommend. And by the way, you guys know that we could talk about breastfeeding all day long, but nothing that I say should ever replace what a lactation consultant is telling you that's right in front of you. If you're expecting now or you've just had your babies recently, you also might want to call your insurance company and find out if they will cover the cost of a lactation consultant. I know that here in New York City, Aetna covers up to 6 visits. Now, once you know whether they're covering the visits or not, the funniest part is you may not actually find a lactation consultant. So if you start looking while you're expecting, you're going to be ahead of the game and at least have the phone numbers of people that are available. So one thing that certified lactation consultants often recommend is that if you're doing a combination of breastfeeding and bottle feeding, sometimes you'll hear this word nipple confusion that's thrown around. Has anybody heard that? Pause up if you have heard of this thing called nipple confusion. And what nipple confusion is that some experts say that if a baby is drinking from a bottle, the baby is not going to want to drink from the tap because the bottle is easier, and they're just going to get confused and it's going to be a nightmare. I would like to just tell you that I don't believe that that's true. I think that if you are bottle feeding correctly, the odds of you having nipple confusion are slim to none. But once again, if your lactation consultant is like, no, if for this particular situation, for this particular baby, this may be something. So I always want to remind families, and we talk about this a lot in Twiniversity classes, is that your baby is just trying to survive. So your baby is going to eat when they're hungry, they're going to poop when they have to go, they're going to sleep when they're tired, and the fear that expectant parents have of nipple confusion, I just find very, very overwhelming. And I think that it makes people not want to try to use a bottle, and then they do maybe breastfeeding and then it doesn't work, so then they have to give them a bottle and they don't realize that they could do both. So there is one bottle feeding technique which really works fantastically with the Dr. Brown's bottles, and it's called pace feeding. It's something that a lot of our Twiniversity Mom Squad have done, and it's something that we did in the NICU too. And I just want to kind of show you a little bit of what pace feeding is and why it would be beneficial if doing a combination of breastfeeding and bottle feeding. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've made a bottle of formula. I know that Ginger is starving. She's super hungry, guys. Say good morning, Ginger. She has a mark on her head because the dog actually grabbed Ginger and was dragging her around the house this week. That was a little weird, right, Ginger? But we made it through. We lived to tell. So when you're pace feeding, well, if you notice that the Dr. Brown's bottle has this venting system, how am I going to do that, Julie? Julie's sending me a message, and I got to see. Hold on, guys. I don't want to miss Jules' messages. Okay, there we go. I figured out how to do it, Jewel. All right, so while we're breastfeeding, if we're doing a combination of breast and bottle, this is what pace feeding is. And if you look at the bottle that I'm using right now, right, you'll see that I'm going to slowly give the baby milk. I am not going to overwhelm the baby with this milk. And this is if you're doing a combination of breastfeeding and bottle feeding. Clearly, you guys know that if you're ever bottle feeding, you need bibs. And if you're expecting and you're like, hey, listen, you know what? You got to buy a ton of these puppies. So what we do is we basically just let the baby take as much milk into their mouth as they can. Well, clearly, if Ginger was a real baby, she would be drinking this milk that was dripping all over her chin, and it's funny. But that's what we're going to do. We're not going to overwhelm this baby, because then maybe we will have some nipple confusion, and maybe this baby will be like, no, thank you, Mrs. Boob. I'm just going to strictly stick to the bottle. Pace feeding is what it is. You'll do it in the NICU. If you end up in the NICU, you might do it at home if the babies are very little. You may do it too if the baby has any oral motor issues or if the baby has any swallowing issues. There's a lot of reasons why people pace feed. So I did want to bring up pace feeding today because we don't talk about it a lot, but it is something that a lot of twin families do, and you should know that it exists. And it's a great reason it's just a great thing to start out with. Now, here's the other problem about pace feeding. Often grandparents might not be able to get it. Grandparents, when you have your mom helping you or your aunt helping you or other people, they may see this too as an all or nothing situation. But we're going to teach them exactly how to do this. And I also want to reassure everybody that it's important that who's ever feeding your babies, you teach them how to feed your babies as if it's the first time that they ever fed a baby. You should never assume that somebody knows how to correctly feed your babies. So, well, I know you're like, hey, take a baby and feed it, right? That's what we're going to do. But you really have to teach them. So if you're using a pace feeding technique, it's very important that you show them exactly how to pace feed. And pace feeding is not something that may be so intuitive to some people. So this could be formula. This could be breast milk. No one really knows. We did get a question that came up this week, and somebody was saying, hey, Nat, what I do is I give the babies each a combination bottle of breast milk and a formula. Yes, that is definitely an option that you could participate in. However, as crazy as this sounds, I would never mix, Freudian slip. I would never mix formula with breast milk. I would always have two different bottles, one bottle of the breast milk and one bottle of the formula. If you are going to bottle feed exclusively, right? So if I'm going to give Ginger breast milk and formula in a bottle, I would make two separate bottles. I would make sure that I used the same exact bottle. So I wouldn't use like a wide neck for the breast milk and then the tall, narrow bottle for the formula. I would use the same exact bottle with the same exact nipple if I am doing a combination of formula and breast milk. The reason why I don't think that you should ever mix them is because your baby should have 100% of the breast milk first, and then you could give them the formula. So formula is great, but as a backup to breast milk, which I think is how all of us are viewing this anyway, right? So I think it's actually that time. Julie, is it time? What I would love is, before we continue our discussion, I would love to give away a copy of our book. So you guys know that we have this book. A few people read it. It's not too shabby. But if you know what time it is, tell me what time it is, because I always love to know what time it is. And if you'd like to win a copy of our book, all you have to say is, I want to read that. If you haven't read that, it's available on Amazon. It's most likely available in your local library. If your local library doesn't have it, you could call your library and ask for it. They have, thousands of copies throughout the country that are available at local libraries. I was very excited, actually. Right, Ginger? That was one of the things that we were most excited about, that this is available at most libraries. And we talk actually a lot about Dr. Brown's in here because, hello, I used it. I used the Dr. Brown's myself. So if you would like to win a copy of our book, all you just have to say, right, is that I want to read that. So thanks, Jewel, for posting that. So now we're getting more questions that are coming in, and we have one question that says, is nipple confusion a real thing for pacifiers too? I've heard no pacifiers for a few months because of that. I don't think that you should ever do no pacifiers. Pacifiers are purposefully used so you pacify a child, right? That's the whole the term pacifiers, is that I'm going to give this child a pacifier so that I could relax this child. When it comes to twins, pacifiers are significantly more instrumental because there's many times that we have to go attend to another child. So having pacifiers at the ready for your kids is very, very important. Dr. Brown's actually makes pacifiers, and the pacifiers are in tune with their bottles. So it's something you may want to consider. And Julie, if you could pop up a link to the Dr. Brown's pacifiers, that would be pretty fantastic. So I don't think that pacifiers are going to make nipple confusion occur because no milk also ever comes out of a pacifier. So often, the pacifier is going to help them with that sucking and soothing reflex, not necessarily that hunger issue that a baby is going to have. So yeah, I definitely would. I'm a pro pacifier person. Once again, my word is not law, but I find pacifiers to be very instrumental with twin families, because if I have to change a diaper of a crying baby, or I have to feed another baby, or maybe I'm pace feeding both babies and the other baby may be hungry, I may have to give that other child a pacifier so that I can make it to the time where I am going to feed everybody. So yeah, so I don't believe in a nipple confusion when it comes to pacifiers. But the important thing about pacifiers, which is a very, very, very important thing, and I'm going to stop the world to tell you, you have to make sure that you are using the correct pacifier for the age of your child. If you ever look at the pacifier, or if you look at the length of the nipple of a pacifier, this corresponds to their oral motor development. If you're using a pacifier that's too narrow, it's going to interfere with the way that their teeth are coming in. So once, usually from birth to like 3 months is one pacifier. Sometimes there's a pacifier stage from 3 to 6, and then there's definitely one that goes for 6 months plus. You have to make sure that you are always using the correct age pacifier whenever you're using it, because it's going to really mess up our little baby's teeth. So yes. Oh, thank you. Jane just put up the link over on Instagram. That's really great. I love that everybody's helping out with today's hybrid feeding. So if you have a hybrid feeding story, I really, 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 really would love to hear about it. I always wish that there was a way that we could have you guys jump in on these calls, because even though, well, I'll just tell you how we did it, right? So I'm going to tell you how we did it. I know how a lot of families did it, but in the very, very beginning, I started out using the pump exclusively, and the pump really is beneficial. And I brought my pump out here because I love to just take out fancy things and pull everything out of my fancy Twiniversity class bags. But it is important to start building up your milk supply with a pump if you are clearly unable to have access to Fred and Ginger, because maybe they are in the NICU, maybe they're too small. There's so many reasons why you may not be able to build up your milk supply the way that it should if they were just full-term babies and came home. Of course, if they're full-time babies and they come home, them just being on you is going to help you with milk production. But if they're spending time in the NICU, or maybe you're not, up to the task of having them with you in your room, maybe you had a traumatic C-section, or maybe some blood loss or something, well, I do want them on you. You should try to speak to a lactation consultant in the hospital or in the NICU and help them give you tips and tricks on how to specifically build up your milk supply depending on the situation of your babies. So the first thing you're going to do is to build up your milk supply is that you're going to grab your pump and you're going to do that. But let's say we don't have enough. There were times when, I have to tell you the truth, that I did not make enough milk for Fred, that perhaps I only made enough milk for Ginger. This is the time when you would introduce formula. And while I know that it's important for you to build up your milk supply, specifically with the babies or a pump, it's not a bad idea to introduce formula fairly soon in your life story, because if you aren't using a pump, let's just say, it does give your spouse, your partner, your mother, your father, anybody the opportunity to feed this baby. So that is definitely something. I mean, I can't tell you, like Julie and I were talking about this morning, and we were really having a discussion like, how do we introduce this? And I'm like, you know what? Had I known that there was something called hybrid feeding, I probably would have breastfed so much longer. We had a really weird situation where my baby A, I feel, was not really taking to my breast milk. I felt that it was making her super constipated, and there's a million different issues that I could go into, but there was something in my gut, which sounds crazy, and I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but there was something in my gut that was telling me that I really shouldn't necessarily be giving this kid breast milk. I know it's crazy, whatever. I know I'm the needle in the haystack, but I just stopped because I was like, I don't think that she should have it, and I had a lot in the freezer and all this, and there was just something that my daughter wasn't pooping, and she had super bad reflux, and then the doctor recommended this formula. We ended up putting her on the formula, and really everything went smashingly wonderful when she stopped drinking my breast milk. What are the odds of that? I don't know. I think they're like probably 1 billion to 1. I think that I'm certainly the odd man out when it comes to this, but I know that it was true because I saw it myself. I would have never actually believed it if I wasn't there witnessing that this is what was happening with my baby A. But because I wasn't giving my baby A breast milk, why did I stop breastfeeding baby B? Baby B was like super content, growing wonderfully large. He was getting full. His diapers were great. He was wetting on time. He was pooping on time. It was so glorious. But I had this kind of all or nothing situation, and I don't know why I did that. I think about that a lot, and I'm like, you know what? I could have probably breastfed baby B a year. He latched well. It was just crazy. So I want you to know that there are many, 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 many different ways to do this. And of course, we do recommend that you use Dr. Brown's bottles. And I'm thankful that Dr. Brown's is giving us the opportunity to speak to you about this today. Another thing that I wanted to talk about the Dr. Brown's bottles is that I find that the 9-ounce wide neck are significantly more effective than the taller ones. And the reason why, I don't have my other bottle with me. I do. Ta-da! So I wanted to show you a side-by-side kind of them. And do you see that this bottle has like concave sides, right? So it kind of goes in, it's got this hourglass shape, where this bottle is just straight up. In my Twiniversity history, I find that babies are quicker to hold this bottle because it has these little indentations of where their paws are going to stay. So it makes it easier for them to hold their own bottle. And ultimately, we do want that when it's time for them to hold their own bottle. Also, I find that the wide neck of this bottle, right? Let me just open this. Well, I don't need to open it. I could actually just show you this. Do you see how much wider this guy is than this guy? Because this guy is so much wider, this guy, which one do you think is going to be easiest to clean? Right? So this one is going to be significantly more easy to clean, as I have stuff on the end of this bottle. But this one's going to be easier to clean, especially if you're putting it in the dishwasher. By having the wider opening, it's allowing the water to go into it and really clean it. Another thing that I want to mention with the Dr. Brown's bottles is that it's important that you know that there are two different types of bottles. If you're getting Dr. Brown's hand-me-down bottles from your sister or somebody else, all of them have these venting systems. If the venting system is green, this bottle could be used with or without the venting system. If the venting system is blue, you have to use the venting system with the bottle. It's important that you guys know that there's an old versions of Dr. Brown's, which was just the traditional Dr. Brown's bottles, and then there's the Dr. Brown's Options bottles, and the Dr. Brown's Options have the little green venting system. So these I could use with or without. When you're doing also a combination of breastfeeding and bottle feeding, I would stick with the level 1 nipple for as long as you possibly can. If you're going to stop having them to your body, then you may want to consider moving to a level 2, but certainly not too quick. I would say at least a month wait and speak to your pediatrician before you go and start making sudden changes. Also know that the level 1 nipples are fantastic. I talk about this all the time, but the level 1 nipples are fantastic when flying because the edge of the nipple only allows kind of a minimal amount of fluid to flow. When you're on an airplane, it would cause the baby to kind of take in more fluid in smaller amounts and swallow faster, which is going to help clear their tiny ears. So even when you are going from a level 1 to a level 2 nipple, you never want to throw out a few level 1s if you're planning on airplane travel anytime soon. So what else did I want to talk about? I also want to talk about just something that's kind of a big deal, and it's not really specific to bottle feeding or breastfeeding or whatever, but you guys need to set some realistic expectations of what is possible. You know, I wouldn't start out of the gate and say, you know what, I'm going to breastfeed for the first year. I would say that maybe breastfeed for the first week. And after the first week, consider going to 2 weeks and then 3 weeks and 4 weeks. But speak to your partner about what you are actually going to do when it comes to breastfeeding or bottle feeding breast milk or whatever the case may be. Because it's important that you guys know that there is, you know, there is an unrealistic thing. I don't like when people say, oh, I'm going to breastfeed for the first year. You have no idea what's going to happen. So take it in kind of tiny bits and pieces. All right, guess what time it is? Julie just told me. So if you would like to win some prizes, I'm super stoked that we are going to give away a 3-pack of Dr. Brown's Options bottles to 5 different winners. I love when they do that. So if you're using Dr. Brown's bottles now, I also would love to know, so shout it out if you're using them. That's pretty, you guys would already know, and you always know that you could always use more bottles. And families often ask me, how many bottles should I register for? I know, it's a lot of bottles. I do recommend that you register for 16 bottles because that's gonna cover all of your feedings through the day, and you don't have to stop to wash bottles in between. I also think that it's a great idea to have some bottles that are pre-filled with formula and all I have to do is add water. That's another important thing, and you should have two in your diaper bag or at the bottom of your stroller at all times because you never know. You never know, you might be outside. You never know, maybe the kids went for a walk with grandma and then she ended up staying out too long. You never know what's gonna happen. So if you would like to win some Dr. Brown's bottles, all you have to say is, we're hybrid feeders. You don't actually even have to be a hybrid feeder. I just want to know that you guys are willing to try this and know that there are so many different options that you could have. No pun intended with the options bottles, but there are so many, well, actually pun intended. Ginger, that's genius. Pun intended, there are so many different options that you have when it comes to feeding your babies, and hybrid feeding is just a fancy term to saying that I'm doing it all. And twin moms and twin dads know we have no choice. We have to do it all. We've been given a lot of babies at the same exact time. So yeah, and Alla's just saying she loses bottles all the time. You can't lose bottles, by the way. Every single night before you go to sleep, you really should take an inventory of what's in your house, because if a bottle rolls under your couch and it's filled with either breast milk or formula, it doesn't really matter. The stench of it in a few days is not going to be so pleasant, especially in the dead of winter if you have a lot of heat out in the house, or of course in the middle of the summer when it's hot already. So yeah, and Mabel was just saying that she has, I don't know if you're saying that you use the preemie bottles. Dr. Brown's is one of the only companies that creates a preemie bottle that's used by NICUs all across the world, actually. They are a big partner with Graham's Foundation, which I'll be going to their fancy banquet this Thursday, which I'm pretty excited about. So I may be jumping on live on Thursday. I'll be super fancy dressed. I don't do too much more makeup than this. This is pretty much my limit of that. But yeah, I really would like to give away some bottles, and I'm happy that you guys were able to join us today. And hi, once again, to our Instagram families. We will not forget you guys. If you would like to win a prize over on Instagram, send us a direct message and tell us that you're a hybrid feeder. The bell is here. Hold on. Actually, I have a child home, so I don't even have to go anyplace. Buddy, could you buzz that in, please? Thank you. I know, he has a double ear infection. See, so if you're like, oh, when they're little, they're so sick. They still get sick when they're big, and it's tougher. My little puppies. Well, I'm glad that we have given away a bunch of bottles. We will not forget you, our Instagram peeps. Do not worry about it. But please, please, please go over and check out our friends at Dr. Brown. They have a fantastic Facebook page. They have a ton of resources over on their webpage as well. And I really do want you to know it is not an all or nothing situation. And do whatever you feel is best. You got to do what works for you, your families, and your twinnies, not what anybody else in the universe says, including me. Just make it through. You're going to be okay. And don't forget that if you have any specific questions, comments, or concerns or anything, you could shoot us a direct message over here on our Facebook page or over on our Instagram page, and we will answer that as quickly as possible. So I hope you found this beneficial discussion on hybrid feeding. And yeah, I wish you the best of luck, and just know that we're there to support you every step of the way. And please also don't forget that we have our mentorship program. So Rasheen is actually over on the Instagram page right now, which is funny. So if you have any interest in receiving a mentor or becoming a mentor, we would love to match you up with somebody either in your area or maybe in a similar situation than you. So see you later, alligators. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I wish you the best of luck on your hybrid feeding journey. And once again, thank you to our friends over at Dr. Brown's. See you later, alligators.